Picture this, it's the roaring 20s. Flappers are doing their thing, jazz is sizzling, bathtub gin is, well, let's just say potent. And suddenly this guy explodes onto the silver screen. And the world, it pretty much short-circuited. We're talking women literally fainting in the aisles. Grown men reportedly questioning their entire existence. Who was this Italian import, this phenomenon? Who became Hollywood's very first global male sex symbol? Forget your Timothée Chalamet, your Harry Styles for a hot minute. Long before they were making hearts flutter, there was Valentino, Rudolph Valentino. You know him maybe subconsciously as the Latin lover, the OG, the guy whose smoldering gaze, projected 20 feet high in glorious black and white, could apparently cause mass swooning and maybe even, I don't know, rearrange furniture with its intensity. But was he just that? Just slicked back hair, bedroom eyes, and pants tailored maybe a little too tight? Or was there something more complex flickering behind that famous stare? Oh, you bet there was. Turns out the screen's great lover was also a surprisingly sensitive soul, a determined immigrant chasing a dream, and ironically, a man who ended up fighting tooth and nail against the very image that rocketed him to stardom. So, buckle up, film fans, because Hollywood Unveiled is peeling back the celluloid layers on the incredible life, the scandalous headlines, and the heartbreakingly early death of Rudolph Valentino. This isn't just a dusty old biography. It's a wild ride through the highs and lows of unprecedented fame, a deep dive into the search for identity, and the story of how Hollywood tried to shove its first exotic superstar into a neat little Latin lover box. Spoiler alert, the box wasn't nearly big enough. What really went on behind those famous eyes? We're about to find out, but first, what's the first thing you think of when you hear the name Rudolph Valentino? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We know you have some. All right, let's hit the rewind button. Way back, May 6th, 1895. The place, Castellaneta, Italy. Now, this wasn't exactly the glamorous backdrop you might picture for a future Hollywood legend. Think less rolling hills of Tuscany, more, well, a somewhat dusty, sun-baked little town nestled in the heel of Italy's Boot Puglia region. Picturesque, sure, but a far cry from the Klieg lights of Tinseltown. And the name, oh the name. He was born Rodolfo Alfonso Raffaello Pier Filibert Guglielmi di Valentina d'Antonguola. Yeah, try fitting that onto a movie marquee. Let's just call him Rodolfo for now, shall we? It's easier on everyone. So who were the Guglielmis? Well, Papa Giovanni Guglielmi was a veterinarian, and apparently a former army captain with some claims to minor nobility. Though let's be clear, they weren't exactly rolling in dough like the Medicis. He was respected, yes, but not extravagantly. Wealthy. Think comfortable, but not buy a private island comfortable. He was described as rather stern, perhaps a bit distant, a man dedicated to his work, which likely involved tending to the local livestock more than attending grand balls. Then, there was Mama Marie Berta Gabrielle Barben Guglielmi. She was French, born in Paris, and by all accounts quite beautiful, perhaps bringing a touch of foreign elegance to Castellaneta. She was also the daughter of a glass factory owner, suggesting a comfortable middle-class background herself. Accounts suggest she might have been the stricter parent, perhaps a bit more concerned with appearances and propriety, which, let's face it, might have clashed beautifully with her youngest son's budding personality. Imagine the dynamic. The practical Italian father, the elegant French mother, and a house bustling with kids. Rodolfo wasn't an only child. He had an older brother, Alberto, an older sister, Maria, and tragically, a younger brother, Umberto, who died in infancy. So picture it, a household likely brimming with energy, probably filled with the passionate arguments and affections typical of an Italian family, maybe even a stray dog or goat wandering through, courtesy of Papa Giovanni's. Profession, It was likely lively, loving, but perhaps not always easy. Some reports mention financial strains, especially later on. Now, was little Rodolfo born radiating matinee idol charm? Not exactly. Early reports paint a picture of a rather headstrong, energetic, and frankly difficult child. Spoiled, some whispered. A handful, others declared more charitably. He wasn't necessarily a bad kid, just a lot. Restless, possessing an energy that seemed too big for the quiet streets of Castellaneta. Maybe those famous bedroom eyes were still just eyes looking for the next bit of mischief. You can almost picture his mother sighing dramatically, perhaps muttering under her breath in French or Italian, "Questo ragazzo mi farà impazzire." This boy will drive me crazy. It seems the future heartthrob started his career by first testing the patience of his own family. This wasn't a quiet, studious child destined for the priesthood or academia. This was a spark waiting for a place to ignite. And Castellaneta, charming as it was, probably felt less like home and more like a starting gate he was eager to leave. Life throws curveballs, and young Rodolfo got hit with a big one early on. When he was just 11 years old, in 1906, his father Giovanni passed away, losing a parent at that age. That leaves a mark. It wasn't just the emotional blow, though, that must have been immense for the sensitive boy. It also destabilized the family's already precarious finances. Suddenly, the world probably felt a lot less secure, a bit more wobbly on its axis for the Guglielmi family. This loss likely amplified that restless feeling simmering inside him, perhaps fueling a desire for escape, for something more, something different. His academic career, let's just say it wasn't exactly stellar. He clearly wasn't cut out for the path his family might have hoped for. They tried sending him off to various boarding schools, including one focused on agriculture in Genoa. Can you picture it? The future, master of the smoldering gaze, mucking out stalls. Yeah, apparently, Rodolfo wasn't thrilled about the prospect of a life filled with fertilizer and farm animals. He reportedly did poorly, showing little aptitude or interest. One account even suggests he was expelled from a school in Perugia, possibly for indiscipline or poor grades. The details are a bit murky, but the pattern is clear. Formal education, especially the practical kind, just didn't click with him. But while he wasn't acing his exams, other interests were starting to bloom. Early signs of the performer-to-be were emerging. He apparently developed a love for dancing, not just shuffling around, but dancing. He enjoyed moving, the rhythm, the grace, and clothes. He liked dressing well, standing out, presenting himself with a certain flair, even as a teenager. Think less farmer in training, more budding dandy. These weren't just superficial interests, they were hints of an artistic temperament, a desire for self-expression that farming couldn't satisfy. He preferred fancy footwork over fieldwork. You, and could say, now indulge me in a little speculative fun based on his later reputation. Legend, or maybe just colorful exaggeration, has it that his troubles at school weren't just about bad grades. Perhaps his charm was already causing complications. Could it be that teenage Rodolfo, already discovering the effect his looks and continental manners had, was maybe a little too interested in the local signorinas, or perhaps just too rebellious for the strict school authorities? We don't have concrete proof of him being kicked out specifically for being a ladies' man at that age, but doesn't it just fit the narrative? You can almost imagine a stern headmaster shaking his head, thinking, this one, he's going to be trouble, or famous, or both. This feeling of restlessness, this sense that he didn't quite belong, wasn't just standard teenage angst. It seems deeper, more pervasive. It was the nascent stage of what would become a lifelong quest, a search for a place, an identity, a sense of belonging where he wasn't just the difficult kid or the aspiring farmer who failed. He yearned to escape the perceived limitations of his small town, the expectations he couldn't meet. His gaze was already turning westward, across the vast Atlantic. America was calling, the land of opportunity, of adventure, of wide open spaces, and maybe, just maybe, a place where a restless Italian boy with a flair for dancing and nice clothes could finally find his stage. So what was it about Castellaneta and southern Italy in the early 1900s that might have made a young man like Rodolfo dream of escape? Life back then was steeped in tradition. Beautiful, absolutely, with ancient landscapes and deep-rooted customs, but for a young man brimming with unconventional ambitions, maybe a bit suffocating. Imagine the social expectations. Follow in your father's footsteps, find a respectable local girl, settle down, raise a family. Stability was prized, predictability was encouraged. Dreaming of becoming, say, a world-famous movie star, not exactly on the standard career path. There was also the inherent contrast of the region. The undeniable beauty often existed alongside significant poverty or lack of opportunity, especially compared to the industrializing North or the booming promise of America. While the Guglielmis weren't destitute, they weren't immune to the economic realities of the Mezzogiorno, particularly after Giovanni's death. Plus, let's consider the outsider factor. Having a French mother already made the family slightly different in a tight-knit community. Perhaps young Rodolfo, with his developing interests in things like dance and fashion, things that might have been seen as less manly or practical by local standards, felt this difference keenly. He might have seemed a bit too refined, a bit too other for some of his peers. This early experience of not quite fitting the local mold could have sensitized him to the feeling of being an outsider, a feeling that would follow him. Ironically, even when he became one of the most famous faces on the planet. Honestly, put yourself in his shoes. You're young, you're restless, you feel like you don't quite fit, and you hear these incredible stories about America, the land of boundless possibility, skyscrapers touching the clouds, fortunes waiting to be made, a place where maybe, just maybe your past didn't define your future. Wouldn't you be itching to see it for yourself, especially when home felt like a beautifully embroidered but ultimately too small coat? The decision wasn't made overnight, of course. There were likely family discussions, perhaps arguments. His mother, Marie, seems to have played a key role. Some accounts suggest she actively encouraged him to leave, perhaps seeing it as his best chance, or maybe just hoping distance would force him to mature and find his way. Whatever the final push, the decision was made. In late 1913, barely 18 years old, Rodolfo Guglielmi boarded a ship, the SS Cleveland, as records show. Destination, New York City. He sailed away from Italy, armed with his burgeoning good looks, a natural charm, probably a suitcase with a few sharp outfits and not much else in his pockets. A one-way ticket to the new world. He wasn't just leaving Castellaneta, he was embarking on that fundamental search for belonging, for acceptance, for a stage big enough for his dreams. The curtain was about to rise on the next act, under the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. So picture our young Rodolfo stepping off the boat at Ellis Island in December 1913. Eyes wide, heart full of hope, ready to conquer America. Except reality check. New York City wasn't exactly laying out the welcome mat with open arms and a ticker tape parade. The initial experience was less American dream, more American hustle. His meager funds evaporated faster than morning mist. Dreams of easy street quickly dissolved into the harsh reality of needing to survive. He found himself doing whatever odd jobs he could find to keep body and soul together. We're talking busboy, waiter, gardener, scrubbing floors, clearing tables. Can you imagine? The man who would soon make women swoon worldwide was likely wrestling with dirty dishes and pruning rose bushes. From potential Italian nobility, or at least comfortable middle class, to the lowest rungs of the service industry. Talk about a humbling plot twist. He later reflected on this time, not with bitterness, but acknowledging the struggle. I was disillusioned at first, bitterly so. I found that one needs fight for everything. But then a lifeline appeared, tapping into that talent he'd nurtured back in Italy: dancing. New York in the 1910s was embracing new dance crazes, especially the sultry tango imported. From Argentina, Rodolfo discovered his smooth moves and natural grace could actually earn him money. He became what was known then as a taxi dancer, or tango pirate, in upscale restaurants and dance halls, sometimes called cabarets. Now, what's a taxi dancer? Basically, women, often wealthy society ladies looking for a thrill or simply a skilled partner, would pay young men like Rudy 10 cents a dance. It existed in a slightly grey area, respectable-ish, but with whispers of gigolo undertones. Hey, it paid the bills, kept him out of the soup kitchens, and importantly, allowed him to afford those sharp suits he loved. A contemporary observer might have noted, these young fellows, often foreign, are hired for their looks and their dancing ability, providing companionship on the dance floor for lonely or adventurous women. This period was crucial for developing the look. He started consciously cultivating the image that would later define him. The dark hair, meticulously slicked back. Hello, Brill cream, or its equivalent. The tailored suits, emphasizing a lean physique, and that intense, focused expression he perfected on the dance floor. He was learning how to command attention, how to communicate allure and confidence without uttering a single word. A pretty handy skill to have in your back pocket when silent films eventually came calling, wouldn't you say? His dancing wasn't just technically proficient, it was passionate, conveying a story, a connection with his partner. He wasn't just leading, he was captivating. However, his New York chapter didn't end with a triumphant leap to stardom. Nope. It ended with, well, a scandal. Rudy got tangled up in a rather messy, high-profile divorce case involving a wealthy Chilean heiress, Blanca de Sol. She accused her husband, John de Sol, of infidelity, allegedly with Rudy's dance partner, Joan Sawyer. Complicated, I know. Rudy testified in Blanca's favor. Things got ugly. Blanca eventually shot her husband dead, claiming self-defense. She was later acquitted. But Rudy's association with the scandal, including accusations that he'd committed perjury or was perhaps more than just a friend to Blanca, made New York suddenly feel very unwelcoming. There were even whispers of potential charges or deportation. One gossip columnist might have cattily remarked, young Guglielmi seems to have tangoed himself right into trouble. So what's a charming but scandal-adjacent young man to do? Head west. Around 1917, seeking distance from the New York mess and perhaps drawn by the burgeoning film industry, Rodolfo Guglielmi arrived in Los Angeles, Hollywood. But again, the gates didn't just swing open. He started at the bottom, picking up bit parts, often playing the heavy, the gangster, the vaguely foreign villain. Hollywood in the late 1910s wasn't quite sure what to make of his looks. He wasn't the clean-cut, all-American boy-next-door type like Wallace Reed. He was different. Too ethnic, perhaps, for heroic leads in their eyes. So he was cast as the menacing other in films like Alimony, 1917, or A Society Sensation, 1918, often playing characters with names like Tony or Rico. He recalled this typecasting later. They seemed to think that because I had dark hair and eyes, I must be a villain. He was getting work, yes, but he was still far from the star he dreamed of becoming. The search continued, now under the California sun. Okay, so Rudy's been grinding it out in Hollywood for a few years, playing assorted thugs and exotic side characters. Getting noticed maybe, but hardly setting the world on fire. And then came the movie that changed everything, The Earthquake, the big one. We're talking about The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, released on March 6, 1921. This film, directed by the visionary Rex Ingram and adapted from a sprawling novel by Vicente Blasco, Ibáñez was an epic anti-war drama. Valentino was cast, somewhat against type at the time, as Julio Desnoyers, a charming Argentinian playboy caught up in the tragedy of World War I. It was a significant role, a chance to show more range than just shady foreigner. And boy, did he seize it. But the moment that truly cemented his place in cinematic history, the scene that practically broke the internet before the internet existed, was the tango sequence. Can we just talk about the tango? Picture this. Valentino, dressed in a striking, tight-fitting gaucho costume, enters a crowded Parisian nightclub. He spots a woman he desires, played by Alice Terry. With smoldering confidence, he clears the floor, takes her in his arms, and launches into the most electrifying tango audiences had ever seen. The intensity, the controlled passion, the sheer magnetic presence. He didn't just dance the tango, he embodied its spirit, sensual, dominant, almost dangerous. One critic at the time raved, "He dances the tango as if it were a prelude to seduction itself." Forget the plot for a second. That scene became the film's unforgettable signature. Suddenly, women across America, and soon the world, collectively decided they desperately needed to be swept off their feet, preferably by a brooding stranger. In Argentinian attire, The Four Horsemen was a colossal, unexpected smash hit. It resonated deeply with post-war audiences and became one of the highest-grossing silent films ever made. And overnight, Rudolph Valentino wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a phenomenon. The press went wild. They needed a label, a hook, and they found one, the Latin lover. The term exploded, plastered across headlines, defining his image for the public. He became the embodiment of a new kind of male movie star, exotic, passionate, sophisticated, maybe a little forbidden. He later expressed mixed feelings about the label, stating, "A man should control his life. Mine is controlling me. I don't like the Latin lover idea." But in 1921, it was his ticket to the stratosphere. Hollywood, never one to miss a trend, immediately sought to capitalize on this new sensation. If Four Horsemen lit the fuse, his next major film, The Sheik, released later that same year, October 21, 1921, was the full-blown explosion. Directed by George Melford, this film cast Valentino as Sheikh Ahmed Ben Hassan, a powerful desert chieftain, who kidnaps an independent-minded Englishwoman, Lady Diana Mayo, played by Agnes Ayres. Now let's be honest, the plot is problematic by today's standards, kidnapping as courtship. Yikes. But back in the anything-goes atmosphere of the early 20s, it was pure, unadulterated catnip for audiences hungry for escapism and romance. With an edge, the image of Valentino in flowing robes, gazing intensely from under his kohl-rimmed eyes, yes, they used makeup, became instantly iconic. The Sheikh cemented his status as the ultimate exotic fantasy figure, powerful, mysterious, commanding and utterly irresistible to legions of fans. He might not have loved the roles, but the public couldn't get enough. These two films, released within months of each other, launched Valentino into a level of superstardom rarely seen before. He followed up with other major hits that played on his established persona, like Blood and Sand, 1922, where he played the doomed Spanish matador Juan Gallardo. Cue more tight pants, more smoldering intensity, more tragic romance. It solidified his collaboration with important figures like director Fred Niblo and co-star Nita Naldi, who often played the vampy counterpoint to his lovers. While Rex Ingram had arguably discovered his potential in Four Horsemen, directors like Melford and Niblo helped solidify the Valentino brand. Even Ingram, who directed Valentino again in The Conquering Power, 1921, was likely astonished by the sheer velocity of his former Discovery's ascent. Rudy had arrived, bigger than anyone could have imagined. The Latin lover was born, and Hollywood would never be quite the same. So, Valentino is now arguably the biggest male movie star on the planet, swimming in fan mail, besieged by adoring crowds, his face plastered everywhere. Sounds like the dream, right? Well, hold your horses, because with great fame came great headaches, especially when dealing with the studio system. His home studio, Paramount, originally famous play as Lasky, was thrilled with the box office receipts he was generating naturally. But they also saw him as their prize commodity, something to be managed and exploited, not necessarily nurtured as an artist. Valentino quickly grew frustrated. He felt the quality of the scripts he was being offered after The Chic and Blood and Sand were subpar, often recycling the same tired exotic lover tropes without much substance. As he reportedly complained, "They are trying to make me into a celluloid chic. I want to be Valentino, not some caricature." And then there was the money. While he was making good money by normal standards, it wasn't commensurate with the astronomical profits his films were raking in for Paramount. He felt undervalued and disrespected. Tensions simmered. His marriage to the strong-willed Natasha Rambova around this time, we'll get more into that later, certainly didn't help smooth things over with the studio bosses who disliked her perceived influence and artistic interference. This simmering resentment boiled over in 1922. In a move that stunned Hollywood, Valentino, encouraged by Rambova, went on strike. He refused to work for Paramount, demanding a significant salary increase, better scripts, and more artistic control. Can you imagine the sheer audacity? Telling the most powerful studio in town, essentially, "Pay me what I'm worth and stop giving me trash to film or I walk." It was a high-stakes gamble. Paramount played hardball, suspending him and invoking clauses in his contract that prevented him from working for any other film studio. This standoff dragged on for nearly 2 years. 2 years at the peak of his fame when he couldn't make movies. So what did the world's biggest movie star do to pay the bills and keep his name out there? He went on a nationwide vaudeville tour with Rambova, capitalizing on his fame and dancing skills. They performed exhibition dances, primarily the tango, to packed houses across America, sponsored by a mineral water company, of all things. It was a financial success, proving his enduring popularity. But some saw it as a step down, a movie god reduced to performing on stage like a common entertainer. A contemporary critic might have sniffed, "While Valentino draws crowds, one wonders if this prolonged absence from the screen might tarnish his mystique." Meanwhile, the press wasn't always kind. While the fans remained largely loyal, some columnists and critics began to pick at his image, scrutinizing his personal life, his marriage, and, increasingly, his masculinity. More on that infamous pink powder puff incident later. The public adored the Latin lover image, but the press often seemed eager to find cracks in the facade, building him up only to relish tearing him down. It was the classic double-edged sword of celebrity. He faced immense pressure to live up to this larger-than-life persona, while simultaneously feeling trapped and misrepresented by it. Now let's not paint him as just a victim here. Rudy had fire in his belly. There were undoubtedly moments he wanted to metaphorically, we hope, throttle a studio executive. Rumor has it that negotiations with Paramount got extremely heated. Maybe not sending coded threats via carrier pigeon, heated, but definitely passionate Italian gestures and raised voices filling the room, heated. He fought back against the constraints, against the typecasting. He took his craft seriously, contrary to the image some tried to paint of him as just a pretty face. For Blood and Sand, he diligently studied bullfighting techniques with experts to bring authenticity to his role as a matador. For The Chic, despite the film's fantastical elements, he researched Bedouin culture, striving for a level of detail the script probably didn't even require. He wasn't just showing up and looking good. He cared about the characters, even when he felt the stories themselves were lacking. This period of conflict reveals his determination, his artistic integrity, and the fierce battle he waged against becoming merely a product in the Hollywood machine. So what made Valentino so different? So impactful beyond just being incredibly good-looking? It was his entire package, his style, his presence, his very otherness in the context of early Hollywood. He fundamentally challenged the prevailing ideal of the American leading man. Think about the typical male stars before him, often sturdy, stoic, conventionally handsome wasp types, the Douglas Fairbanks senior athletic mold, or the Wallace Reid clean-cut ideal. They represented a certain rugged, straightforward American masculinity. Then came Rudy. He wasn't rugged, he was graceful, he wasn't stoic. His face was incredibly expressive, capable of conveying a storm of emotions with just a subtle shift. In his eyes, or the curve of his lips, his masculinity wasn't about brute force. It was about charisma, passion, a certain vulnerability mixed with undeniable confidence. His superpower, it had to be the gaze TM. Seriously, the man could convey more longing, menace, passion, or heartbreak with one sustained look into the camera lens than pages of dialogue ever could. Film historian Kevin Brownlow noted, Valentino had a unique ability to project sincerity and intensity through the camera. His influence wasn't just confined to acting style. He became a major fashion icon. That slicked-back, gleaming hair became the look for aspiring, sophisticated gentlemen everywhere. Sales of hair pomade must have skyrocketed, and wristwatches. Before Valentino, wristwatches were often considered somewhat feminine. Men typically carried pocket watches, but Rudy wore them prominently, both on and off screen, popularizing the wristwatch as a stylish male accessory. His overall presentation, the tailored suits, the attention to detail, the continental flair, made men reconsider their wardrobes. Suddenly, looking polished and maybe even a little exotic was becoming aspirable. He made effort look cool. Culturally, his contribution was immense, even if fraught with complexity. He was the first major Hollywood star whose appeal was explicitly tied to his perceived foreignness. He broke the mold, proving that a leading man didn't have to look like he stepped off the Mayflower to capture the hearts and dollars of American audiences. He made exotic desirable on a scale never seen before. While Hollywood often saddled him with stereotypes, his very success challenged those stereotypes simply by existing and being adored. He inadvertently paved the way, albeit on a path strewn with obstacles, for future generations of actors who didn't fit the traditional Anglo-Saxon mold. Before Rudy, the quintessential screen hero usually looked and sounded a certain way. After Rudy, the possibilities, while still limited, had definitely expanded. This connects directly back to his central struggle, that search for acceptance versus the constraints of his image. Films like The Sheik, while problematic, were revolutionary in presenting a non-Anglo hero as the romantic lead who gets the girl, even if by questionable means. It was a seismic shift, but off-screen, he was constantly battling the negative stereotypes associated with that very image, the perception of being effeminate because he danced, cared about his appearance, and projected sensitivity. His entire career became this tightrope walk, leveraging the Latin lover persona for unprecedented fame while simultaneously trying to transcend it and be recognized for his artistry, and perhaps just for the man he was, Rodolfo Guglielmi. His style wasn't just about clothes or hair, it was a statement, a challenge to the rigid definitions of masculinity in his time. He brought a different flavor to Hollywood, and its palette has been more interesting ever since. Romance. You can't talk about the great lover without diving into his own tumultuous love life, right? And let me tell you, it was pure Hollywood. A drama packed with impulsive decisions, intense passions, and headline-grabbing breakups. First up, marriage number 1, Jean Acker. They tied the knot in November 1919. Acker was an actress, relatively minor at the time, though she had connections. Their courtship was apparently a whirlwind, lasting only a few weeks, and the marriage itself? Get this, it was legendarily short and bizarre. The story goes that on their wedding night, Acker experienced instant regret, locked Valentino out of their hotel bedroom, and declared the marriage over before it even began. Can you imagine? Congratulations, you're married and locked out. It remains one of Hollywood's weirdest and briefest marital episodes. The marriage was reportedly never consummated, and they separated almost immediately, though the official divorce took a couple of years. Why the sudden reversal? Theories abound. The most persistent rumor is that Acker was primarily interested in women and may have been involved with powerful figures in the industry, like actress Alla Nazimova. Some speculated she married Rudy impulsively, perhaps seeking cover or societal acceptance, only to realize her mistake instantly. Others suggested maybe she just got cold feet or was using him for connections, though his star hadn't fully risen yet. Whatever the reason, it was a baffling and likely humiliating start to Valentino's marital career. He supposedly lamented. Later, "Why must women injure me so?" Then came marriage number 2, and this one was a doozy. Natasha Rambova. Born Winifred Shaughnessy, she adopted the more exotic Russian name for her dancing career. Rambova was a force of nature. A talented costume and set designer, a dancer, an aspiring director, and a woman with very strong opinions and artistic sensibilities. They met on the set of Uncharted Seas, 1921, and sparks flew. Intense, artistic, ambitious sparks. If Rudy was the smoldering fire, Natasha was the gasoline, ready to amplify the blaze. A friend might have quipped, "With Natasha, Rudy didn't just find a wife. He found a collaborator, a Svengali, and sometimes it seemed a beautiful warden." They married in Mexico in May 1922. There was just one tiny problem. Rudy's divorce from Jean Acker wasn't actually final yet in California. Oops. This led to bigamy charges when they returned to the US. He avoided jail time, but had to wait a year before they could legally remarry in the States in 1923. Talk about starting off on dramatic footing. Rambova's influence on Valentino was profound, both personally and professionally. She saw him not just as a matinee idol, but as a serious artist. She encouraged him to fight Paramount for better roles and more control. She designed stunning, often elaborate and stylized costumes and sets for his films, like Monsieur Beaucaire, 1924, aiming for historical accuracy and artistic elevation. However, her influence was controversial. Studios resented her interference, finding her difficult and demanding. Some critics and even fans felt her high art aspirations were making Valentino seem pretentious, or even, again, effeminate, particularly with some of the more flamboyant costumes she designed. Was she elevating his image or alienating his base and his bosses? The debate raged. She reportedly declared, "Rudy is an artist. I will not permit him to prostitute his art." Noble, perhaps, but not always practical in the studio system. Their relationship was undeniably passionate, but also notoriously tempestuous. Two massive creative egos, both used to being the center of attention, living under one roof amidst the pressures of superstardom. It was a recipe for conflict. Studio friction, artistic disagreements, and sheer personality clashes took their toll. By 1925, the fiery romance had burned out. They separated and divorced, leaving Rudy heartbroken once again. It seemed even the great lover couldn't conquer the complexities of a Hollywood marriage, especially one involving two such strong-willed individuals. After Rambova, there was another high-profile, highly dramatic romance, Pola Negri. The exotic, temperamental Polish film star was, in many ways, Valentino's female counterpart. Their relationship began shortly after his separation from Natasha and was intensely public, passionate, and filled with grand gestures, perfect fodder for the hungry gossip columns. Were they genuinely in love? Or was it partly a performance? For the public, two European superstars creating their own dramatic narrative, maybe a bit of both. Their tempestuous affair would culminate in Negri's famously theatrical display of grief at Valentino's funeral, ensuring their connection would be remembered, debated, and analyzed for decades to come. Rudy's love life, it seems, was destined to be as captivating and ultimately tragic as any role he played on screen. Being the world's most desired man wasn't all roses and fainting fans. Behind the glamorous facade, Rudolph Valentino was fighting some serious personal battles, grappling with fame, identity, and relentless public scrutiny that often turned nasty. The most infamous attack came in 1926, just months before his death. An anonymous editorial, likely penned by journalist Frank O'Neill, appeared in the Chicago Tribune under the headline, "Pink Powder Puffs." The piece lamented the supposed decline of American manhood, pointing to things like college boys wearing slickers and the recent installation of powder puff dispensers in men's restrooms. And who did the writer use as the prime example of this horrifying feminization? Rudolph Valentino. The article sneered at his screen persona, his perceived vanity, his popularity with women, essentially questioning his masculinity and calling him a corrosive influence on American men. It was a vicious, personal attack disguised as social commentary. Can you imagine reading that about yourself in a major newspaper? "They have insulted my manhood," Valentino reportedly fumed. His reaction, pure, unadulterated fury. This wasn't just criticism. It struck at the core of his identity, his Italian sense of honor. Deeply wounded and enraged, Valentino did something utterly dramatic. He published an open letter challenging the anonymous writer to a boxing match, or failing that, a duel. "I challenge the author of Pink Powder Puffs to meet me in the prize ring," he declared publicly. "Talk about defending your honor, old school style." The fight, perhaps thankfully, never materialized as the writer remained anonymous. But the incident highlighted the intense pressure Valentino felt regarding perceptions of his masculinity, a pressure exacerbated by his different background and on-screen sensitivity. This tied directly into his ongoing struggle with the very image that made him famous, the Latin lover. While it brought him wealth and adoration, he felt increasingly trapped by it. He yearned to be seen as a versatile actor, capable of playing different kinds of roles, not just the perpetually smoldering exotic. He wanted respect as an artist, not just an object of desire. In conversations, he'd express this frustration. "Do you know what it means to feel that you are appreciated only for your looks? That is a terrible thing. Imagine creating a phenomenon only to desperately wish you could escape it." It was a gilded cage, beautiful from the outside, but confining within. All this pressure, the studio battles, the public scrutiny, the personal attacks, the tumultuous relationships, the weight of global fame, inevitably took a toll on his physical and mental health. The stress was immense. He suffered from recurring digestive problems, including painful stomach ulcers, which were likely exacerbated by the constant anxiety and pressure. Friends noted periods of moodiness and melancholy beneath the charming exterior, smiling for the cameras while battling internal demons. It's a tragically familiar Hollywood story, isn't it? The sparkle in those famous eyes might have still been there for the cameras, but behind the scenes, the strain was showing. Where did he find solace? Perhaps in his magnificent Beverly Hills estate, Falcon Lair. Perched high in the hills, it was a symbol of his success, filled with antiques and art he loved collecting. But maybe it was also a fortress, a place to retreat from the demanding crowds and critical press. He also found companionship in his beloved dogs, particularly his Dobermans, Kabar and Kassar. Animals offer uncomplicated affection, something perhaps lacking in his human relationships, and maybe, just maybe, he found some peace in simple, relatable pleasures. Did the great Valentino enjoy cooking? Some accounts suggest he might have enjoyed whipping up Italian dishes, a taste of home, a way to connect with his roots and de-stress away from the Hollywood madness. Even Latin lovers need hobbies, right? It's these little humanizing details, the love for his dogs, the potential comfort in cooking, the quiet moments in his grand home that remind us there was a vulnerable man, Rodolfo Guglielmi, living inside the dazzling, demanding persona of Rudolph Valentino. Life wasn't all movie sets and dramatic confrontations for Rudy. There were other significant moments and experiences that shaped the man behind the legend, offering glimpses into his life. Beyond the Klieg lights, that vaudeville tour during his 1922-1924 strike against Paramount, it was more than just a way to make money. It was a fascinating chapter in itself. Imagine being in, say, Omaha, Nebraska, and heading down to the local theater, not for the usual jugglers or comedians, but to see the world's biggest, most glamorous movie star, Rudolph Valentino himself, performing the tango live on stage with the equally striking Natasha Rambova. Surreal, right? They traveled the country town after town putting on their dance exhibition. It kept them financially afloat, maintained their public profile, and proved Rudy's immense drawing power even without a new film. But it must have been grueling. The constant travel, the less than glamorous backstage conditions compared to a movie set, perhaps even a feeling of, well, slumming it for a star of his magnitude. Yet it also showed his determination and his connection to the audiences who adored him. He wasn't afraid to take his show on the road. Then there was his big trip back to Europe in 1925. This came after he finally settled his contract disputes, leaving Paramount and signing a more favorable deal with United Artists. And after the painful divorce from Rambova, he needed a break, a reset. He traveled extensively, spending time in France and significantly returning to Italy. It was partly a vacation, a chance to escape the Hollywood pressure cooker, but it also seemed like a pilgrimage, a chance to reconnect with his roots, to perhaps rediscover the real Rodolfo Guglielmi away from the manufactured persona of Valentino. He visited his family, revisited old haunts, and was reportedly treated like visiting royalty, though perhaps with a touch more genuine warmth than the sometimes fickle adoration of Hollywood fans. You can imagine him breathing the Italian air, maybe feeling a sense of belonging he craved, trying to recharge his batteries before plunging back into the fray. He stated during this trip, "I'm glad to be home. In Hollywood, one forgets the simpler things in life." And back in Hollywood, there was Falcon Lair, his sanctuary. This sprawling estate wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Decorated lavishly with antiques, art, and artifacts collected from his travels, it reflected his success and his taste for the finer things. It was the scene of glamorous parties where Hollywood's elite mingled. But behind the glittering facade, one wonders if it was also a lonely place at times. A grand palace fit for the chic he played on screen, but perhaps sometimes feeling like a gilded cage for the man himself. Did he wander its opulent rooms late at night, pondering the strange trajectory of his life? Okay, let's imagine one of those Falcon Lair dinner parties. Maybe he didn't actually throw a champagne glass across the room in a fit of pique, like in some melodramatic movie scene, though with the personalities involved, who knows? But you can bet the drama was often thicker than the pasta sauce. Imagine the mix. Hollywood egos, artistic temperaments, lingering tensions from studio battles, maybe whispers about his latest romance or professional feud. It must have been electric, fascinating, and utterly exhausting all at once. These off-screen moments, the grueling tour, the soul-searching trip home, the solitary reflections within his grand estate, all paint a richer, more complex picture. They all seem to tie back, in one way or another, to that fundamental search for respect as an artist, for stability in his personal life, for acceptance as a man, maybe even just for the simple sense of belonging that Rodolfo Guglielmi from Castellaneta had set out to find all those years ago. So, when the dust settled, when the headlines faded, what was Rudolph Valentino's lasting impact? Was he just a fleeting craze, a product of the Roaring Twenties excess? Absolutely not. His influence on film, fashion, and culture was profound and continues to echo even today. Let's reiterate his pioneering role in cinema history. He wasn't just a star, he was arguably the first male global superstar whose fame was intrinsically linked to his image as an exotic, romantic figure. Before him, the concept of a male sex symbol often relied on rugged, all-American archetypes. Valentino shattered that mold. He proved that passion, sensitivity, and a certain continental flair could be incredibly potent on screen and wildly appealing to audiences worldwide. He fundamentally altered the definition of a Hollywood leading man, shaking up the established man box and opening the door, however slightly, for different kinds of masculinity to be portrayed and desired. Later stars, from Charles Boyer to Antonio Banderas, owe a debt to the trail Valentino blazed. He made different, not just acceptable, but incredibly magnetic. As film critic Molly Haskell observed, Valentino represented a dream of the other, a potent mix of the forbidden and the familiar. His cultural footprint extended far beyond the movie theater. We talked about the fashion influence, the slicked-back hair, the popularization of the wristwatch, trends that took hold partly because he embodied them. His electrifying tango in The Four Horsemen didn't just make him famous, it helped catapult the dance itself into mainstream popularity across America and Europe. Suddenly, everyone wanted to learn the tango, to capture a fraction of that smoldering intensity. More broadly, he influenced perceptions of male attractiveness, suggesting that elegance and emotional expressiveness could be just as compelling, if not more so, than traditional ruggedness. Think back to those iconic works. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, The Sheik, Blood and Sand. These weren't just popular movies, they were cultural touchstones. That tango scene? It's still referenced and revered as a masterclass in screen chemistry and physical storytelling. The image of him as the Sheik gazing intensely from the desert sands, it became cinematic shorthand for exotic romance and dangerous allure, endlessly imitated and parodied, proving its iconic status. His legacy remains complex, absolutely. He achieved unimaginable fame, chasing that elusive American dream, that deep-seated search for belonging he carried from Italy. Yet, the very image that propelled him to stardom, the Latin lover, became the source of immense personal struggle, a stereotype he fought against until the very end. He wanted to be more than just the Sheik, more than just a fantasy figure, but it's undeniable that he left an indelible mark on Hollywood and popular culture. And hey, thankfully, he managed to do it all without having to actually engage in fisticuffs with any pesky newspaper critics in a boxing ring. That probably would have complicated the legacy just a tad. Just when Valentino seemed poised for a new chapter, having signed with United Artists for more creative freedom and potentially more mature roles, like his final film, Son of the Sheik, which ironically revisited his most famous character but allowed for more complexity, tragedy struck. And it struck fast. In August 1926, while in New York City for the premiere of Son of the Sheik, Valentino suddenly collapsed in his hotel room. Rushed to the hospital, he was diagnosed with appendicitis and severe gastric ulcers, likely the result of years of stress finally taking their physical toll. He underwent emergency surgery. Initial reports were cautiously optimistic, but complications arose, specifically peritonitis, a dangerous abdominal infection. Despite fighting hard, Rudolph Valentino died on August 23, 1926. He was only 31 years old, 31, at the absolute zenith of his fame. The news hit the world like a physical blow. It was shocking, sudden, and felt utterly unbelievable. The great lover, the seemingly immortal screen god, was gone. What followed was, well, pandemonium doesn't quite cover it. His death unleashed an unprecedented outpouring of public grief, bordering on mass hysteria. His funeral arrangements, first in New York City and then back in California, turned into chaotic public spectacles. Tens of thousands of people, overwhelmingly women, thronged the streets outside the funeral homes, desperate for a final glimpse. There were scenes of weeping, fainting spells, near riots as crowds surged against police lines. Newspapers reported suicides linked to despair over his death. It was like Beatlemania, decades early, but steeped in tragedy and fueled by the intense, almost personal connection fans felt to his screen image. Has there ever been such a reaction to a star's death since? Maybe, but Valentino set the benchmark for public mourning on a global scale. One headline screamed, "World weeps for Valentino," and for once, it wasn't hyperbole. Such a sudden, dramatic death at such a young age inevitably fueled speculation and myth-making. Conspiracy theories whispered about poison, murder by jealous rivals or husbands, even curses linked to a ring he supposedly owned. These stories added another layer to his legendary status, transforming him from a movie star into a near-mythical figure. And then there's the enduring legend of the woman in black. Starting shortly after his death, a mysterious veiled woman, dressed entirely in black, began appearing at his crypt in Hollywood Forever Cemetery on the anniversary of his death, leaving a single red rose. Her identity was debated for years. Was she a former lover, a devoted fan, a publicity stunt? Several women later claimed the title or were identified as potential candidates, but the anonymity and persistence of the original figure captured the public imagination, becoming a poignant symbol of enduring devotion and the romantic mystique that surrounded Valentino even in death. He wasn't forgotten, far from it. His films, though silent, continued to be shown and studied. His life became the subject of numerous biographies and eventually films and documentaries. He received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His name remains synonymous with silent film stardom, the Latin lover archetype, and the dizzying, dangerous heights of early Hollywood fame. How could anyone forget the man who made the world swoon, then broke its heart? So who was Rudolph Valentino? The immigrant who conquered Hollywood against the odds? The sensitive artist trapped by a manufactured image? The passionate lover whose own romances ended in heartbreak? A victim of his own unprecedented fame? Truth is, he was likely all of the above and more. A complex, contradictory figure wrapped in charisma and celluloid. His time burning brightly on the world stage was tragically, breathtakingly short, less than a decade from obscurity to global icon to sudden death. But the intensity of that light, immense. He arrived at a specific moment, tapped into a public yearning, and redefined screen romance and male stardom in ways that still resonate. He remains one of classic Hollywood's most iconic, fascinating, and ultimately deeply human figures. That restless boy from Castellaneta searching for his place? He found it, all right, in the dreams of millions, forever flickering on screen as the immortal Sheik, the passionate tango dancer, the one and only Valentino. What do you think is Valentino's most lasting legacy? Was he a true screen legend or more of a product of his time? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. We love hearing from you. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into classic Hollywood glamour and drama, show us some love. Hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to Hollywood Unveiled so you don't miss our next exploration into the lives behind the legends. Want even more? Consider checking out our Patreon, link in the description, for exclusive content. And to help support the channel, thanks for watching, film fans. See you next time.